Chronicles from the Future, the amazing story of Paul Amadeus Dienach. Chronicles of the Future tells the story of Paul Amadeus Dienach. Introductions typically attempt to present the essence of a book, highlighting the most important elements of the story you're about to read. My introduction does not do that. Rather, I will be telling you the story of how this unique text came to be and its journey from the 1920s until today. This is a book that contains the diary of a man who never intended his words to be revealed to the world. It chronicles an experience that was never shared for fear of ridicule and disbelief. As you work your way through this, his very personal memoir, basically it's his diary, the reason for secrecy will soon become clear. The author claimed to have lived in the future and returned back to his original era, 20th century Central Europe, to record a detailed account outlining exactly what happened during his journey. The real protagonists of this amazing true story are two persons: Paul Amadeus Dienach, the author, and the man who claimed to have lived in the future, and George Papahadzis, Dienach's student of German language studies, to whom he left his notes. Obviously, George Papahadzis was Greek. The diary you hold in your hands today. After making their first acquaintances, let's start unraveling their story step by step. Who was Paul Amadeus Dienach? Paul Amadeus Dienach was a Swiss-Austrian teacher with fragile health. His father was a German-speaking Swiss, and his mother was an Austrian from Salzburg. Dienach traveled to Greece in the autumn of 1922. After having recovered from a one-year coma caused by a serious illness, hoping that the mild climate of Greece would improve his condition. During his trip to Greece, Dienach taught French and German language lessons in order to provide himself with a minimum income, and among his students was George Papahadzis, a student that Dienach appreciated more than any of the others. Papahadzis describes his teacher as a, quote, very cautious and very modest man that used to emphasize the details, end quote. Dienach, as we learn from Papahadzis, was born in a suburb of Zurich and lived his adolescence in a village near the large Swiss city. He later followed humanitarian studies and the strong inclination to the history of cultures and classical philology. It's believed that he eventually died from tuberculosis in Athens, Greece, or on his way back to his homeland through Italy, probably during the first quarter of 1924. Before Paul Dienach died, he entrusted Papahadzis with a part of his life and soul, his diary. Without telling Papahadzis what the notes were, he left him with a simple instruction that he should use the documents to improve his German by translating them from German to Greek. Papahadzis did as he was asked. Initially, he believed Dienach had written a novel, but as he progressed with translations, he soon realized that the notes were actually his diary from the future. Back to the future, time traveling to the year 3906 AD. At this point, we have to clarify something crucial. Dienach is thought to have suffered from encephalitis lethargica, a strange neurological disease that develops an immune system response to overloaded neurons. The first time Dienach fell into a lethargic sleep was for about 15 minutes. The second time it was for a whole year. During this year that Dienach was in a coma in a Geneva hospital, he claimed to have entered the body of another person, Andreas Northam, who lived in the year 3906 AD. Once he recovered from his coma, Dienach did not talk to anyone about his remarkable experience because he thought he would be considered crazy. However, what he did do was write down the entirety of his memory relating to what he had seen of the future. Towards the end of his life, he even stopped his teaching job in order to have as much time as possible to write everything he could remember. Dienach describes everything he experienced of the environment and people of the year 3906 AD, according to the mindset and limited knowledge of a 20th century man. This was not an easy task for Dienach. There were many things he claimed not to have understood about what he saw, nor was he familiar with all their terms, technology, or the evolutionary path they had followed. In his memoirs, he claims that the people of the future fully understood his peculiar medical situation, which they called conscious slide, and they told Dienach as many things as they could in relation to the historical events that took place between the 21st and the 39th century. The only thing they did not tell him was the exact story of the 20th century in case Dienach consciousness returned back to his original body and era as he did. They believed it would be dangerous to let him know his immediate future and the future of his era in case it disturbed or altered the path of history and his life. Whatever happened to Dienach's Chronicles from the future? By reading Dienach's unique personal narration page by page, you'll be able to decode what he claims to have seen in relation to humankind, our planet, and our evolution. Many may wonder what happened to the diary in all that time, from the distant year of 1926 until now, almost a century later. George Papahadzis gradually translated Dienach's notes with his not-so-perfect German over a period of 14 years between 1926 and 1940, mostly in his spare time and summer breaks. World War II and the Greek Civil War delayed his efforts of spreading the amazing story that landed on his desk all those years ago. On the eve of Christmas 1944, Papahadzis was staying with a friend at a house which was also occupied by the Greek army. When the soldiers caught sight of Dienach's notes, which were of course in German, they confiscated them because they considered them suspicious. They told Papahadzis that they would return them only after they had examined their contents. They never did. But by then Papahadzis had already finished the translation. George Papahadzis tried to track down information about Dienach by visiting Zurich 12 times between 1952 and 1966. He could not find a single trace of him, nor any relatives, neighbors, or friends. Dienach, who is thought to have fought with the Germans during World War I, probably never gave his real name in Greece, a country that had fought against the Germans. After the end of World War II and the Greek Civil War, Papahadzis gave the translated diary to some of his friends, Masons, Theosophists, professors of theology, and 2 anti-Nazi Germans. Once everybody realized what they had in their hands, the diary was kept within a close philosophical circle and in the Teutonic Lodge, in which he was a member. The book was taken very seriously by the Masons, who did not want the information spread to a larger circle. They considered the book to be almost holy, containing wisdom about the future of humanity and better kept only for the few. Finally, after strong disputes, George Papahadzis decided to publish Dienach's diary. It was during that period that Greece entered the hardest phase of its 7-year dictatorship in 1972. Strong protest from certain church circles who considered the book heretic, and the fall of the dictatorship a year later condemned the first edition to oblivion. No one was interested in the future when the present was so intense and violent. All these factors, along with the difficult language and the rough style of Dienach's notes, which mixed together elements of his past along with his experience of the future, made the diary even more difficult to understand. Only a few had the time, patience, and knowledge to decode the secret knowledge that lay encoded within almost 1,000 pages. Another edition followed in 1976 in Greece. However, again, the book disappeared and it was hardly mentioned again, apart from the few that knew of its existence. After all the silence, Papahadzis died and his family did not wish to carry on with his work. Saved from oblivion, Achilleas, Syrigos, and the Chronicles from the Future. 22 years passed before the diary was picked up again by Rhadamanthis Anastasakis, again a Greek, a high-ranking member of the Masonic Lodge in Greece who decided to publish the book on a small scale, exactly as it was previously written. That's when I discovered the book for the first time and started to restore it, without the sentimentalities that kept Papahadzis from doing something more than an exact translation of the holy scripts of his teacher. Almost a century after the original script was written, this was a task that had to be undertaken so that the 21st century reader could understand what a 20th century man wanted to say. And so I did it, making sure not to change any of the content, but filtering out irrelevant notes pertaining to Dienach's early life and emphasizing his experience of the future, but in a simpler language and without the gaps that Dienach's narration had. I've tried to keep the true essence of his story intact. This was my debt to Dienach, whose Chronicles of the Future completely changed my perspective of life. Nothing more, nothing less. My only goal was to make it accessible to all of you, because if Dienach's experience was indeed real, this book contains revolutionary information, something the Masons clearly recognize, and it has the potential to radically change our view of the world and mankind. Now that you know the background to this unique story, I will simply deposit the future in your hands with an abstract from the introduction of the 1979 edition of the book by George Paparazis, the man who personally knew Dienach. Quote, the translator of the original text knew Dienach personally. His belief is that the inspiration and writing of these texts was not an imaginary creation of Dienach based on his education and insightful abilities. It's a true phenomenon of parapsychology that was linked to his life. Maybe he has also added his own things. Maybe he didn't see or live all of the events that he so vividly describes and presents. What is certain is that most of the basic elements of his text are true experiences that he had. He lived in advance a part of the future to come, and a metaphysical phenomenon of incredible clarity happened to him, a phenomenon of parapsychology that rarely happens with such an intensity and roughness. Because of him, what is going to happen on Earth, starting from the last decades of the 20th century up to 3906 AD, is now known to us, at least in general terms. End quote. I have to tell you that while Paparazis was just a student at the time of receiving Dienach's diary, he went on to become a very respectable man of his era. He was vice president of the European Movement, National Council of Greece, founding member of the Greek Philosophical Society, and a professor of philosophy and culture. He risked a lot in publishing Dienach's work, and this on its own reflects his unwavering belief in his authenticity. And there's a link here if you want to buy the Chronicles of the Future. Now, this is originally published on Ancient Origins here under a Creative Commons license, and it's on Collective Spark by Achilleas, Syrigos, Ancient Origins. Please leave your comments. Thank you for your support. Kindly support my Patreon account. The daily posts are 5 videos daily, and they are totally different from what I have on my YouTube channel. Thank you so much for your support and that you find all my content so interesting. You'll find the Patreon account details in the description box below.